Welcome to Reinventing Parking, the podcast about parking policy for anyone who wants a better city and better urban transport. Are parking minimums an endangered species internationally? That's the title of the article I wrote for the March edition of the Parking Today magazine. Parking Today is a US-based parking industry trade magazine, and it's also the company behind the annual Parking Industry Expo. I thought I would share my article with you as a short extra episode of Reinventing Parking, in between our regular monthly episodes. Some of what I say will be familiar for regular listeners, but I hope you will also learn something new, and maybe find some encouragement or inspiration. By the way, the March edition of Parking Today is its international edition, and it has a bunch of interesting articles, which you can find at parkingtoday.com/issues, where you should click on the March 22 edition. Anyway, here is my article. Are parking minimums an endangered species internationally? Few policy tools are universal, but minimum parking requirements come close. They're a feature of planning codes from Johannesburg to Manila and from Santiago de Chile to Calgary. You may have heard about a push to get rid of these regulations. Doing so means leaving parking provision decisions to the discretion of real estate owners and developers. It means a more market-based balance of supply and demand. It gradually leads to less free parking. It results in a larger proportion of parking being subject to management and pricing. It is therefore a good thing for the parking management industry. But is it really happening? The practice of mandating on-site parking with buildings emerged in 1923 in Columbus, Ohio, in the United States, and gradually spread. By the mid-1990s, minimum parking requirements, let's call them parking mandates, applied in almost every municipality in the world, even in China and in the former Soviet bloc. However, the tide seems to have turned. Awareness is spreading about the harms caused by parking mandates. Parking professionals are slowly instilling confidence that cities can manage on-street parking when they need to. More officials understand that they don't need to boost parking supply. A surprising number of cities across the United States have already abolished parking mandates, either wholesale or in certain areas. The Parking Reform Network has a handy map, which you can find at parkingreform.org/resources/mandates-map. So when did this trend start, and is it just a USA thing? Professor Donald Shoup of UCLA has been building the case against parking mandates since the 1990s, inspiring a movement dubbed the Shoupistas. But the trend started earlier, although it was limited to downtowns at first. In 1976, London abolished parking mandates in the City of London, which is the financial district, and imposed maximums instead. In the same decade, New York City, San Francisco, Boston, and Portland in the USA swapped downtown parking mandates for downtown parking supply restrictions. That was at the behest of the Environmental Protection Agency in an effort to ease air pollution problems. A different way to defang downtown parking mandates was more popular across the USA and in other countries. This involved allowing waivers in return for payments in lieu of parking. Cities used this revenue to fund public parking and or other improvements. In downtown Santa Monica, for example, parking mandates remained, but buildings with zero on-site parking became possible. German cities took this approach in an odd direction. Some of them wanted to limit city centre parking to reduce traffic, but they had a problem. German states, not cities, are responsible for parking mandates. What was the creative solution? Some cities went ahead and banned downtown developments from providing on-site parking. But what about the parking mandates that remained on the books? No problem. These cities simply made developers pay fees in lieu for the required parking that they were banned from providing. Sounds reasonable? But all of this was just a limited attack on parking mandates, which still ruled almost everywhere. A new twist came in 1997 when Berlin, in Germany, swept away all parking mandates across the whole city. As a city with state-level status, Berlin had the power to make this bold move. In 2001, England started a national phase-out of its parking mandates. National Policy Guidance PPG 13 required local authorities to shift from mandating car parking, minimums, to limiting it, maximums. This was partially reversed in 2019 when the National Planning Policy Framework opened the door again to minimums. Nevertheless, London still imposes maximums, not minimums, for almost all areas and developments. In 2014, Hamburg followed Berlin's example. In the same year, Sao Paulo in Brazil abolished all parking mandates. Since then, wholesale parking mandate abolitions have accelerated, especially in North America. In 2017, both Mexico City and Buffalo in New York abolished their parking minimums. They were followed by South Bend in Indiana, Hartford, Connecticut, Portland, Oregon, and others. The trend reached Canada during the pandemic with Edmonton's 2020 open option parking reform. In early 2022, Toronto has followed suit. As of February 2022, New Zealand has banned most local governments from imposing parking mandates. Only parking for use by persons with a disability or with limited mobility can be required, as is typical for parking mandate abolitions. Many more cities have been abolishing parking mandates, but only in places with good transit service. Paris in France is one example. In fact, its dense network of metro lines means parking mandates apply almost nowhere in the inner city. In 2019, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil abolished residential parking mandates, but only in transit-rich corridors. So, is the end of parking mandates near? Momentum is gathering, but it would be premature to label parking minimums an endangered species. Most cities in the world still have excessive parking mandates. Most are not even yet debating their abolition. To be fair, some places have little reason to abolish parking mandates. Japan's parking mandates have been in place since the 1960s, but they are unusually benign. They are set at low levels, exempt small buildings, and apply only partially to middle-sized buildings. Most parking is managed, and these parking mandates are not an obstacle to the development of small buildings on small sites in Japan's cities. Other cities do see the harm of conventional parking mandates, but they are trying to reduce their harm rather than abolishing them. Many cities around the world have lowered their levels, especially in the core areas and near good public transport. Tailoring parking standards, both minimums and maximums, according to public transport accessibility, is the main approach in the Netherlands and in Swiss cities. In 2004, Seoul in Korea adopted very low minimums and new maximums for 5 of its most intense transit-oriented business districts. Shenzhen in China has also been lowering its parking minimums, especially in transit-oriented areas. Over 4 decades, San Francisco tried various ways to reduce the harm of parking mandates. But by the end of 2018, this tinkering ended in the wholesale abolition of its parking minimums. Maybe other cities that are tinkering with their parking mandates will end up abolishing them wholesale too. What has happened to cities that have abolished parking mandates or greatly reduced their harmfulness? Is parking in crisis? Or is it impossible to find? Well, the short answer is no. Nothing is perfect, but parking management mostly has them covered. They're doing fine. So that was the end of my article. And regular listeners would notice that many of the cities that were mentioned there are featured in various editions or articles on the Reinventing Parking website. So if you want more details on those, have a hunt around the Reinventing Parking website. That's all for now. Thanks a lot. See you next time. You've been listening to the Reinventing Parking podcast, and I'm Paul Barter. You can find out more at reinventingparking.org, where you'll find ideas and tips on parking policy. You can also listen to other episodes, subscribe, or leave a comment. That's reinventingparking.org. Bye for now.